Hey everyone, I hope your week continues to go well. This week we should finish chapter 1. So as far as your readings and where you should be done with chapter 1. Next week we're going to do chapter 2, and I'll start also sending other readings from either news clippings or other textbooks or other guides of dealing with Texas politics. And I'm always going to remind you, early voting in Texas starts October 13th. So we'll talk about that as well. So as we are finishing chapter 1, one of the things, or many of the things that I wanted you to pay attention to was that, no surprise, Texans had to struggle for equal rights. And when I say Texans, I do mean people of color and women. And one of the women that you will see continually in Texas history and Texas politics, her name is Minnie Fisher Cunningham. She was very, very strong and influential in this struggle for equal rights. The Marital Property Act, which states that a woman actually could not even own property, that is something prior to that we need to look at, as well as the 19th Amendment. So now, women in Texas, we were not allowed to vote. So we had the same struggle that blacks had. We were not allowed to serve on juries. We were not allowed to have property rights. And this is where you saw Minnie Fisher and others come to fight for the aid of women, to make sure that we receive the same rights as men. Minnie Fisher Cunningham, she was a huge, huge champion in the suffrage movement for women in the state of Texas. African Americans, we had to deal with a white primary, and it's exactly what it sounds like. A white primary is something that when you would have a primary election, only whites were allowed to participate. So if you were black, you were not allowed to vote or participate in the primary. And at the time, they called it a white primary. You saw at the time also the Democrat Party was the dominant party. They were the ones who, the Democrat Party were the ones who fought against inclusion of blacks in the voting process. The Ku Klux Klan, which is a hate group, that's pretty much what they are. The KKK, they were very dominant again and joined forces with the Democrat Party to make sure that blacks were not allowed to vote and participate. And around this time, that's when a group called the NAACP, National Association for Colored People, National Advancement Association for Colored People, NAACP, and they rose up during this time to fight for blacks, to give blacks the right to vote and other things that we or people of color were denied. There is a lawsuit called Sweat versus Painter, and that is illustrated in your textbook. Please be sure to read about Sweat versus Painter, the lawsuit. And it talks about a gentleman named Herman Sweat, who successfully integrated Texas public law schools after the U.S. Supreme Court began to chip away at the separate but equal doctrine. There was a separate but equal doctrine that said it was legal to separate blacks and people of color from white people and to have separate schools and other separate facilities. But here's the hiccup. These facilities had to be of equal standing. And as we began to look through a lot of these facilities, we found out that was not the case. It was not of equal standing. And so a gentleman named Herman Sweat petitioned to go to law school. And the U.S. Supreme Court said that he would be allowed to go to a non-black law school, and that is what the lawsuit of Sweat versus Painter covers. So make sure you read that lawsuit very well, very closely, and you understand the facts surrounding it. Anyway, so the U.S. Supreme Court started to chip away at the separate but equal doctrine, and then that's what the landmark case, Sweat versus Painter, which was in 1950, centered around. Equal rights, as I mentioned, the struggle were for blacks and women. And now we're seeing many in the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community in Texas fighting for their rights as well. There's a chart in your textbook which has key landmark Supreme cases that I want you to know or review. For instance, Smith versus Allwright, which was in 1944, and the constitutional violation was that no state shall deny any person the right to vote because of their race, which is the 15th Amendment. That became the 15th Amendment. The Sweat versus Painter case that I mentioned in 1950, which says the violation that was overruled was no state shall deny any person the equal protection of the laws, which became the 14th Amendment. And then you had a lawsuit called Hernandez versus State of Texas. This occurred in 1954. And this surrounded Texas' practice of denying Latinos the right to serve on juries. So believe it or not, a lot of us try to get out of jury duty, but people of color had to sue to actually be able to participate on juries. And as we proceed in the semester, one of the things we talk about juries is having and selecting a jury of your peers. Well, how can you select of your peers if people of color are not allowed to serve? So that's why Hernandez versus the State of Texas in 1954 is extremely important, because this allowed Latinos to actually serve on juries. Another very, very, very important case is Brown versus Board of Education in Topeka. This happened in 1954, and it surrounded the state laws that mandated statewide segregation of public schools and most facilities to the public. Our state of Texas was among 17 southern states with statewide laws requiring segregation. So 1954 was extremely important for us in Texas, because we were one of 17 states that still upheld in our state segregation. In other words, we did not, up until this point, in many instances, it was not legal for the commingling, the mixing of the races. And then we have Lawrence versus Texas. This lawsuit occurred in 2003. It's a Texas law making homosexual conduct a crime. 14 southern states said that if you were a homosexual, it was a crime. And all the way up until 2003, we did not have a ruling on that. So of course, we all know that that is not the case. And not only that, we have gone much further in Texas, and it has now been struck down, and now homosexuals are allowed to marry each other in many, many states. That was against the law as well. As we proceed and we're moving forward in Texas, we've noticed that our demographics are changing significantly. We are one of the fastest growing states. People all want to come to Texas. Everything's bigger and better in Texas. You'll even see a lot of slogans from conservatives saying, "Don't California my Texas," The reason for that is because of the influx of so many people from so many states, including a large percentage from California coming into Texas. Why? Lower taxes, free enterprise, entrepreneurship. People of color are more successful starting and achieving a business in Texas than in most states. Females are more successful than in most states, and so the word has gotten out and everyone wants to come to Texas. Our increased diversity is part of what we are proud of, and that's part of our legacy in Texas. Voter participation. We still have pretty low voter participation. So again, I'm going to keep reminding you, October 13th is early voting. If you haven't done so, please register to vote. I don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican or independent, but I do care if you don't exercise your right. So please, please register to vote. I will be providing links on Blackboard for you to register to vote. Please do so and exercise your right. You can't complain if you haven't exercised your right. So that is our first chapter. I think now you're getting the hang of it. I'm going to be producing these videos as you're reading each chapter, and I'm going to highlight key terms, phrases, areas for you to focus on, things that you will see coming up in quizzes and exams and in discussions, and things that you will see coming up in your final at the ending of the semester. As always, feel free to send me any questions at Jacquie, at balyprojects.com, and I will be communicating with you almost daily, if not daily, on Blackboard. Anyway, until next time, you guys be careful, and I'll see you soon.